All right, so I really wanted to hold off before making this video, but I think it's necessary and I think it's time. What is black culture? Is black culture synonymous with street culture? Is black culture and street culture one and the same? Is being black being street? Why is it that society promotes the idea that the black identity is rooted in the street identity? And when I say the street identity, I'm talking about gangsterism. Why is black culture synonymous with gangsterism? Now let's find out what culture means. All right, culture is the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. The customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. All right, so that's the definition from the dictionary. I'm going to give you my definition of culture. Cult. You can take that to mean group. And culture is the institutions of a people. Institutions means an institution is a tradition that's passed along, something that's embedded into the culture, something that's inherent in the culture. Inherent means something that's already coming along with it. So institution, let's define that. A society or organization founded for a religious, educational, social, or similar purpose, an established law, practice, or custom. So you can say that an institution within black culture can be athleticism. We've always been very athletic, and we had high marks and high achievements in sports. We know how to cook real well, very resilient. After slavery, we went all over basically black culture is just our way of life. And black culture what came out of black culture is jazz, Elvis, he was inspired by it, rock, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles. They gave props to all the old Delta blues artists for creating the genre that they basically were mimicking and extrapolating on. You know, they didn't steal it, but they were influenced by it. So why is it that as our country tries to convince us that being black is being street? Our culture is basically a culture of gangsterism. And even though a person may be a civilian who works a job and they're not a criminal, that sort of that idea that's being promoted will force that person to think, okay, in order for me to be accepted by my own, I have to be street. I have to take on street principles, gangster principles. And that leads to people like a guy who might be a security guard for a hotel. And he might see something bad going on with a child. A child might be getting abused. The child might be 15 and she may be getting abused by a man in his 40s. But that person wants to not be a snitch because he thinks that's our culture. He thinks that's the way to be accepted by our people. He thinks that's the bond. That's what bonds us. That's what binds us as black people. Not being a snitch. He doesn't think that the civil rights era binds us as a people and our experience from then to here, the process that we went through to be able to go to whatever hospital we want. Remember, they had white and black hospitals. Remember, I had an uncle who passed away because he was a light-skinned guy like me, got into a car accident. His face was so bloody that the white ambulance thought he was white. Once he got to the hospital, they realized he was black, so they took him back to the scene of the crash. They stuck him back in the car. They called the black hospital. It was a long ways away, and he died. And there was no way to sue because at that time, it was legal. That was the law. So how are you going to sue the white hospital for enforcing law? It was legal segregation. That was the law. So my whole thing is this. Culture is supposed to be something that you add on to it. You know, the institutions stay. The generations change, but the institutions and the customs stay. Culture is not getting killed at 18. Culture is not joining a gang and everybody dying in 10 years. A whole generation dies out and goes to prison in 10 years. And then after that 10 years, another generation pops up in their place and then they die and go to prison. And then that's not culture. That's death. That's a death culture. We're supposed to be creating culture and passing it along. What, you know, our ancestors created jazz, and we were supposed to keep that going generation after generation and improving it, passing it along. But we abandoned that. And once rap came along, I mean, we thought that the streets was our culture. I mean, the streets, we think that's our culture. And here's the reality. If 100,000 black people die every 10 years, that means that 500,000 black people die every 50 years. At 44 million, a third of that is adults, a third of that is children, and a third of that is senior citizens. So let's say that there are only 15 million black adults in America. And every 50 years, 500,000 die. How can we ever move beyond 12% of the population? In 100 years, you know, 100 years, 1 million black people die from homicide. So they promote, the outside forces are promoting to black people that our culture is street. Our culture is gangsterism. Our culture is not jazz. Our culture is not the black institutions that have been passed on from generation to generation. You know, homemade ice cream. Black people, you know, we used to be very rural. If you ask your grandmother or your mother if they came from like a southern town or a small town, they'll tell you, yeah, my family used to make homemade ice cream. We had cows, we had pigs. My mama used to cook this and that. That's black culture, that recipe, that pie, that homemade ice cream that's passed on. Culture lives. Culture lives and gets passed on, just like I passed you this tissue. And then you pass it and pass it, and next thing you know, 50 years from now, it's still being passed around. Culture is not death. So the worst lie that we believe, that we've allowed ourselves to believe as a people, is our culture is synonymous with street culture. And people will get mad. And because of that, because black people think that our culture is street, people will get mad at me for even speaking like this. They'll get mad at me for even wanting to raise the standard, because in their mind, the standard and the normal and what's normal is being street. That's normal society. That's normal life. Gangsterism. So when you come from a perspective of, why don't you want to live a regular life, a normal life, they don't understand that, because they've been brainwashed to think that a normal life is a street life, a life of death. So yeah, man, if you ever get thoughts in your mind where you're starting to feel sympathy for the streets, or you're starting to think the streets should be glorified, that means that you've been programmed and conditioned. And what's the ultimate goal? To keep us at 12% of the population. So I'm not going to say too much, but you should rewind this video and listen all over again, because I just gave you the game plan of the so-called Illuminati. Peace.